HRN listeners. As we celebrate our 15th year, we are deepening our commitment to giving voice to the next generation of food systems storytellers, and we need your help. Our internship and fellowship programs help activate new possibilities for underrepresented and underestimated young people through experiential journalism, audio engineering, and production training. Through these unique programs, HRN helps food equity stewards build essential workforce readiness skills that expand their potential and foster economic mobility. Please consider supporting these critical programs. And with a minimum donation, you can be entered to win a dinner for two at an amazing restaurant in one of 8 cities and tickets to a concert at a great venue in one of those cities. We have incredible partners across the country who have donated, as they also share our passion for helping to educate the next generation of food systems storytellers. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. And make sure you donate before March 31st. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network since 2009. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni, I'm the host. It's our 14th year on Heritage Radio Network. And, you know, more and more when I'm out drinking and I want something besides craft beer, I'm choosing quality, hard, dry cider. So we're going to talk about the upcoming Cider Week New York and some of the special events and some of the backstory on some of the organizers. So let's go around the room and you guys will introduce each other. Start with Scott and then Rachel.
Excellent. Hey, Jimmy, thanks so much for having us tonight. This is great. I'm Scott Ramsey, and I'm the executive director of the New York Cider Association. And I'll let Rachel introduce herself.
Hey, Jimmy, thanks for having me. I'm Rachel Freier. I am a Cider Week producer, events producer in general, and cheesemonger, cheesemonger at large.
Well, you guys, you've both been really important to me. You know, back in 2011, there was the first Cider Week New York, and that was back when it was run by folks at Glenwood. And it's come a long way. There's so many more producers and events. And, you know, so many things stopped or just paused during the pandemic back in 2020. And it seems like from that, Scott, you came back with a stronger, better Cider Week. So let's talk about, you know, the last few years and just kind of what you've done with Cider Week, just to get us all on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the story goes that I joined the New York Cider Association as the executive director on September 1st of 2020. March 1st of 2020. So if you can remember what time that was, it was nuts. The world kind of fell apart. So I walked in the door and everything changed. Rachel was a tremendous help that year. We just flipped all of Cider Week and went virtual, which was a crazy uphill task, but it was really awesome because we established a YouTube channel for the New York Cider Association. We created all of these really amazing virtual events with some of our presenting sponsors. Glenwood did a really awesome chef and cider pairing that was all virtual. So it was a really interesting time. And again, Rachel was just tremendously helpful in that. And everybody rallied, and we did it virtually for that first year. By the end of the year, at that time, Cider Weeks were still regional events. So we had a Hudson Valley Week that happened first in June. We then had a Finger Lakes Week that I believe was in October. And then we had a New York City Week that was in November. So by the time we were into November, we were having some in-person stuff. We were having some in-person events, but still not fully robust. And then the next year, I think, Rachel, was it in 2021 that we shifted to statewide? I can't remember if it was 21 or 22.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's 21, yeah.
Yeah. So after, you know, the cider industry has grown tremendously in New York State, as you know, Jimmy. And so when Cider Week really started about 13 years ago, there were just a handful of cideries, and now there's over 125 licensed hard cider producers in the state. So the industry's grown tremendously. There's a lot more going on when we have cider weeks. So we wanted to kind of scale our efforts, and we decided that it was time to take Cider Week and go statewide with it. So we came up with this plan to have a cider week in May. So it's the first 2 Saturdays in May. And it's happening literally anywhere you go in New York State. You're never more than a few miles from some sort of really fun, interesting Cider Week celebration during Cider Week.
Rachel, what do you think about the evolution of Cider Week New York? Because I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a natural evolution. We had a little hiccup during the pandemic and the beginning that Scott mentioned with the virtual, which I think in the beginning we panicked and we're like, how are we going to do this? But everyone did rally, as Scott mentioned, and going virtual was really interesting because it encouraged certain cider producers that may have not embraced the power of virtual and social media and just online presentation to embrace it and to develop that for themselves and their brand. And the New York Cider YouTube channel is still alive and kicking, and that's a great like kind of library of cider content which is available now. And I feel like it's a great point, Scott. Just said anywhere you go right now, we're celebrating Cider Week statewide. So really, it feels like a natural progression, and I definitely think it makes a lot of sense.
Rachel, I met you a few years before all this, and I know that you were an event producer. You're always involved with cheese and cider. Let's talk a little bit about your background, and some of the early jobs you had, and just your career path, because you're really like one of the stars of New York cheese and cider.
Oh, thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, my career path, that's interesting. So back in the day, I actually came from music production and nightlife and DJing and producing, music events. Um, and, I kind of wanted a little change in scenery. So I decided to go into the restaurant and hospitality business. Little did I know it was the same hours. I was still up till 3 in the morning, kicking out or cutting off like drunk people at the restaurants. But yeah, I've always had a passion for food and, jumped into the restaurant hospitality industry and, as a manager and general manager. And fast forward, I encountered on one of my jobs, cheese counter and cheesemonger at Choice Green. Back in the day, I was their general manager, and just kind of fell in love with cheese and the stories behind cheese, and met my first official cheesemonger. And I just spent most of my time at Choice Green behind the cheese counter, tasting cheese with him. So fast forward, I decided to work in cheese. I went to Murray's Cheese Bar. Murray's Cheese in Manhattan was opening up a cheese restaurant. They were hiring restaurant professionals, and I basically begged them to hire me because I needed to learn about cheese, and I had all the restaurant experience. So
And
Tia Keenan,
every year they always had like a stellar a lineup of events for Cider Week too, didn't they?
exactly. So they had an amazing, the Tia Keenan and Aristo, her husband, he was the main som for Michael White's restaurants. He put together the initial beverage list for Murray's Cheese Bar. And I remember us training on like 70 wines, and like they had cider on the menu. And for me, that was really the first time I encountered hard cider, which was like 2012. I may have had like a woodchuck before, but he had a French cider from Normandy. He had Isistegi, a Basque style cider, and I want to say he had Foggy Ridge
Wow.
potentially cider on there, if I remember correctly. And that was my first encounter with, oh my God, what are these different cider styles? It's so interesting. Fast forward, he moved on, and other people came and ran that menu. But at some point, I took over the beverage list. And that's when like New York Cider kind of like started rolling into the restaurant. And, I met Steve Seelan from South Hill Cider, Melissa Madden from Finger Lake Cider House back in the day. I met Eleanor Leger from Eden, all the characters, and just fell head over
All
heels
the
in
great
love with
producers
cider.
too. Wow.
Yeah, and Cider Week was so great. Jen Smith and getting to know the Glenwood folk, and going to the Cider Weeks back in Astor Place at the day, and started doing cheese events for the Cider Weeks, and really just cider and cheese became my thing. I love it so much. It pairs so well, and eventually here I am. I'm now in the Finger Lakes, living in cider country, and yeah, loving every minute of it.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
just one thing you said, it it's resonates with when people are talking about turning people on to craft beer. It's the same to me as turning people on to hard cider. And I really feel like you have to start with the traditions. And you mentioned, certain kinds of Spanish cider and Normandy French ciders, and then there's the English style. And a
Right.
lot of people are talking about, you know, there's so many great traditions and wine and beer and cider that you don't need alcohol pop or whatever they call it. So
Right.
that was neat. That's neat, and I just want to let people know. Yes, go out and try the traditional regions first and traditional styles, and you will be blown away. So you mentioned a couple people like Melissa Madden and Steve Sellen. The Finger Lakes is really a unique place, and I think for a while I always associated this resurgence of cider with the Finger Lakes. Um, Tell us about your time up there and just some of the projects you might have worked on or just epiphanies you've had because that's kind of like the mecca, isn't it?
It's definitely the Mecca, for me personally. I think for a lot more people in the cider world. I think, yeah, just, I think it was actually Eve Cider. It was Eve Cidery. It was Autumn Cider that really was one of the first dry ciders that I tried potentially at a cider week, and Steve's and South Hill Cider, that I was like, wait a minute, what am I drinking? Why do these two kind of like connect in my brain? Finger Lake Cider House as well. I was like, there's something, there's almost like this like style. There's a style that's happening that I can almost like, wrap my head around from the Finger Lakes. It was very different back in the day than the styles that were, anywhere else. And it just, cider is meant to be enjoyed with food. And to me, it was just a beautiful and natural, like to discover this style of like high acid and dry, a lot of champagne style, just such a beautiful pairing with cheese. I started coming up to the Finger Lakes, this area, during Cider Week and like a little bit after Cider Week, throughout the year, doing pop-up cheese events with the cider producers here. I used to do them with Melissa at the Finger Lake Cider House, then with Steve. It's at South Hill, and it was just such an amazing experience. And to see, for me, it was, I'm a city girl, so for me to get to know the farms and like the whole kind of like ecosystem here of the cider producers and the farms and the producers of, all this beautiful food and beverage, like just living together. It just made really great sense to me. And that kind of it kind of brought together the whole experience of eating food and drink that was grown together, which is kind of like one of the things we always talk about in the cheese world, terroir and like, cheese from a certain place pairing with, it was a whole experience for me. And it's just really, really a beautiful, beautiful situation.
No, that's a great intro. I was going to say that what I loved about Cider Week, especially those first few years, was that it was really the only time of year that, like at my beer bar, Jamie's Number 43, I would usually stock up on those rare indie ciders, especially from upstate. So we'd get, things from the capital region and particularly from Finger Lakes. I remember Steve Sellen came down with his pack basket, and I still kept I always had kept a few bottles for a few years, and Aaron Burr, Andy Brennan from Aaron Burr. So it's pretty special. It's really I can't like. How would you describe the impact of Cider Week? Because I feel like if Cider Week had never started, I don't think that we'd even be talking about hard cider right now.
Right. And, Cider Week, was the brainchild of, Glenwood. And, back in the day, it was like, Jen Smith and like Sarah Grady and
Sarah
like even,
Grady.
and like Ryan Burke, at Angry Orchard, contributed a lot to this. And really, I think it's just, that celebration of, it's a time where, yes, the cider producers can shine and, offer their cider, but it's also an opportunity for the restaurants and the bars and the retail shops to tell that story and to host cider dinners and really shine a light on like New York ciders. And it's such a, people are always looking for local product, and like here's local beverage that's happening that's really special and unique to this, to the state. And recognized as something special and unique to the state. So for Cider Week to happen and to let like restaurants and bars and shops tell that story is really, really fantastic.
It's
Um,
amazing. From 2011, now 12 years in, went from basically you had never tried hard cider. I'd probably hardly tried any,
right.
to us like making it an important part of our lives. I just want to give one shout out. Scott Ramsey, he's the director of Cider Week New York and Cider Association in New York. Fortunately, it looks like he's had some technical difficulties. We're doing remote recording, so I'm in one spot, New England. And where are you, Rachel?
I'm in Trumansburg, right outside of Ithaca.
That's
Yeah,
great. Where do you think
I
Scott is?
I have no idea where Scott is. He might be in the Hudson Valley. He lives in Beacon, so oops, too much information. But he might be in the
He's
Hudson
all over
Valley.
the place.
He's
Let's
all
go.
over the
Let's go.
place.
Let's go through the list. So, like with the Cider Week coming up, first I'll give my pitch. I'm hosting again this Cider Feast event in Brooklyn. It's October 7th, and I feel like that's a different kind of event because it's in New York City. It's a larger festival where there's different producers. We even have Spanish and French ciders, as well as some other ciders from around the country, as well as New York. In fact, last year I was really proud of the New York lineup, just because one thing with Cider Week is that so many of the cideries themselves are activating their cideries, and people are going there. So they have their
Right.
own events. So there's not as much in New York City as there used to be. So like just last year, for example, at Cider Feast, big shout out to Indian Ladder from up by the Capital Region, Wayside, which is in the Catskills, Brooklyn Cider House, which is Hudson Valley, and Original Sin Cider, Angry Orchard Walden, and then also Po' Boy. It's called Po' Boy Brewery. They make cider as well. So this is a short little snippet of and Orchard Hill as well. I mean, that's just a short snippet of all the cideries and that it came to Cider Feast. But from different cider weeks over the year, like way out in Buffalo area, Oaks Winery with Steampunk.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, let's mention a couple other cideries that we don't always see in New York City that are being impacted by Cider Week.
I mean, yeah, there are definitely. It's to me the New York Cider Association, they're working on the website. There's a really cool map, Jimmy, that they've been working the last couple of years to like populate, so you can actually go on their map and you can actually see all the cideries across the state that are around. You can actually plan trips around it and discover new ones. And I think they're also launching an app that you can actually have in your phone and like, hey, I'm going to this part of the state. What cider makers are around me, which is really cool. Um, but yeah, there are some new cideries that are, participating in Cider Week this year. And I have to say too, Scott's the one out there who literally are, reaching out with the New York Cider Association, throughout the year, getting these cideries to, partake in the New York Cider Association and in Cider Week. But like Bedrock Cidery in Marlborough, New York, like I haven't even tried them yet. I'm excited to go and try these ciders. We have Western New York, we have Clarksburg Cider. They're doing a festival also through this Cider Week, which will include a lot of the Western New York cider makers, which we're not too familiar with, because a lot of these cideries are also regional, so we don't necessarily like get them down in the city. So it's actually an amazing time to like get on the map, go explore. It's a beautiful time of the year. peep some leaves, roll around in some pumpkin patches, and visit a cidery, in a place you haven't been before. It's really
Rachel,
kind of
it
cool.
seems that since Scott came in, and the Cider Week has taken a page from the New York State wine trails, where
Yes.
it's like you're trying to get people to actually go to the cideries.
Right. So the Finger Lakes cideries actually just launched a Finger Lakes cider trail, which is kind of cool. They're kind of just doing it on their own. But I know that Scott is also launching, which I'm not sure if it's going to be ready for this cider week. But definitely sign up and stay tuned. But he's launching a statewide cider trail as well, which will include, of course, the Finger Lakes cider trail, but or at least the cideries. But yeah, those things are emerging, and it's really an amazing tool to be able to like discover our state's riches, as I'd like to say, beautiful ciders made from in New York State.
Oh yeah. Well, Rachel, I know
Yeah.
you're an accomplished person in the industry now. Um, just a few basic questions, like
Hmm.
in the industry, hard cider industry in New York. Are there any type of judging competitions or awards, or are there already existing ones like the Good Food Awards that people
Um,
are looking to?
There are, there is I think it's called the International. I'm honestly can't remember it right now, Jimmy. It happens every year up in Rochester. It has, I mean, there's the ones that are outside of New York State, which is GlenCap, which is, a really respected cider competition. Um, but what is it called? The international. I'm gonna have to edit this out.
We
uh,
don't edit.
I can't remember exactly what it's called. The International Cider Awards. And it is. I actually was. It's embarrassing because I was a judge. So, yes, it is called the International Cider Awards, and it happens once a year. In I want to say, no, that's not what it's called. I'm sorry, but it happens in Rochester. And yeah, I would say the most prestigious one is the one that happens in GlenCap. And there's CiderCon, which happens every year, which is kind of just a huge celebration of cider. It's not an official competition, but you definitely want your cider there if you're a cider maker.
Yeah. And like other things, like I want to get into the new business you have, but also like just how do you describe ciders to people? Because for me, I think of things like fine cider, harvest cider, dry cider. Most people want to try cider. I feel like one thing I love about doing events like Cider Feast is that when people are at a cider event, they want to try everything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, people still have the idea that cider is supposed to be sweet, for the most part, but there's a lot more people that have discovered like dry ciders. And I feel like the natural wine movement has kind of like, helped that along because, a lot of ciders are made in that vein of like natural production. And I feel like that's been a great exposure to like, I want to say wine people, to really give some more, second look at cider and try it and discover like all these really great styles that are just like wine styles, like champagne method. And then you have like dry still ciders. It's not just sweet anymore. When people ask me, oh, cider, I've never had a cider. I'm like, well, do you like wine? Do you drink wine? And then I, always talk about the like dry, like sparkling styles. People sometimes like to compare it to like, I don't know, like kombucha or like beers, but I don't think that's really right. I think I like to compare it more to, except there are some cider styles that are flavored and hopped. Well, that's really great. But I like to, compare it more to like wine styles, and it's basically fermented apple juice, like just like grapes. Back in the day at Cheese Bar, people would order a prosecco. It's aperitivo hour. They're eating cheese. They would
Yeah.
order a prosecco for me, and I'll be right back when I was working the floor, and I would come back with like a sparkling style dry cider and just pour it in their glass for a taste and walk away. wouldn't say a word. And I'd come back and they'd be like, "Oh, that was really delicious. I'll have a glass of that." I'm like, "Great. It is a sparkling cider from upstate New York." They would be like, "What?" So that's my style. That's my way of always like really getting people to understand cider more, in particular the ciders that are made in the style of wine.
Yeah, you have to taste it, right?
You gotta taste it. You gotta taste through it. There's some phenomenal ciders out there that may be considered like a little off dry, and that really shine a light on like the beautiful like cider fruit. There are like styles that are like funky. There's the Sidra style. It's the Spanish acetic style cider. There's a cider out there for everyone.
Yeah, just for me, like little snapshots of Cider Week. I remember the first couple years just trying a range of ciders, and then it seemed like by about 2016, 2017, I'd have a full lineup of really good dry, sparkling ciders. And then a good customer would come in and say, "That's great, but where's the the really dry cedar type cider?"
Right.
So it made me realize that there's so many different styles of cider, and again, it goes back to traditions
Right.
and really being open to the fact that it's like a gift. This apple is a gift. There must be some really cool people in your world who are like pomologists and apple people. And I know you were working on something before. You've had your hand in this a lot, and you've gone really deep. Is there like one thing you want to give a shout out to before we talk about your new business?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of incredible people doing incredible work in cider. Like, it's like you said, like apples are magical. There's just so many they really captivate people and, their attention. And there's a really cool project happening, by Greg Peck from Cornell, with Maria Kennedy. They're doing like an amazing research project and diving deep, and they've been working on it for quite a couple of years now, researching apples, foraged apples and wild apples and ciders, interviewing statewide ciders that are made from foraged fruit and wild fruit, and doing like a lot of in-depth research that will, eventually come out and be available, for everyone, but in particular for, growers and producers. And I think it's really, really amazing and fascinating work that they're doing. Yeah, definitely a shout out to that project.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, we're off to a great start. We're going to take a short break. We'll come back and talk more with Rachel on Beer Sessions Radio. All right.
This episode is brought to you by Roberta's, home of Heritage Radio Network. Roberta's was founded in Bushwick in 2008 and has become one of the most iconic restaurants in the country. HRN made its home inside of Roberta's in 2009, and together they have become part of the DIY fabric of the neighborhood. Roberta's is open for lunch and dinner 7 days a week and serves much more than just the famous wood-fired pizzas. Their team dreams up new salads, pastas, and sandwiches on the regular. Roberta's Tiki Bar is alive and well in the back garden, serving up frozen drinks in the summer and hot toddies in the winter. Stop by the bakery and takeout spot next door for fresh breads, sticky buns, and pizzas to go. But Roberta's also extends beyond Bushwick, with multiple locations in New York City, Long Island, and Los Angeles. You can also find their frozen pies in grocery stores around the country. The spirit of Roberta's, like Heritage Radio Network, is everywhere. Here's to many more years of pizza-powered radio. Learn more about Roberta's at robertaspizza.com.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Support us, become a member at heritageradionetwork.org. We're talking with Rachel Freier from Cider Week New York and other things. She's one of those inspired people who, through some of the early cider weeks in New York, really took to the world of hard cider and is doing some cool things with cheese as well. So, Rachel, tell us about your new job. Scott Ramsey started the conversation by saying you got to ask Rachel about her new job.
Well, I'm originally a cheesemonger by well, I consider myself a cheesemonger by trade. Um, and I started a social cheese club, which basically it's called the Cheese Club, cheeseclub.com. And it is a social club for people who love cheese. Right now, currently, I have about like 200 members, and you kind of sign up, it's free. And the idea is to host social cheese events. I'm not, there are a lot of cheese clubs out there that are, producers offer that you get a cheese box to your house. This is a little bit different. Like you get newsletters with events that are happening around you. And basically and it's always obviously, most of the cheese events involve, pop up at wineries, at cideries, at, local restaurants, however, whatever, but, different spaces. And the idea is to come together and like, with cheese at the heart, always something like delicious to eat, but, to just like kind of socialize around cheese and like discovering new cheese and new cheese traditions and new ways to eat cheese and drink cider or drink wine. And there's another aspect to the Cheese Club, which is a global cheese map. So I'm basically creating a online cheese map that you can discover cheese shops and cheese producers all over the world. So wherever you want to travel, going to Madrid, let me check the map. Oh, there's a cheese shop happening, and there's a calendar of events. So is there a cheese event happening in Madrid while I'm traveling, or is there something happening in Michigan? Oh, let me check the cheese map. So yeah, it's kind of a really fun project. And, at some point when we finish populating with, not finish, but like get a lot of cheese shops up there and cheese producers, I will add on the adjacent industries, which include, hey, check out this cidery, and like they're having a cheese and cider event. So it's really a way to connect travelers and people, that love cheese and love, eating cheese and enjoying cheese and celebrating cheese. It's kind of like this global cheese network.
The cheese is really amazing because I could just literally. I was just thinking of a certain cheese that I love, this fresh feta from a local farmer I know who's doing a nice job, and I can basically just eat the whole container
Yeah.
and just the simplest of things, little crackers or a little bit of fruit, and I don't need anything else. But then there's also there's a lot of classic dishes that are using cheese as well. Um, so there's not really an end to this, is there? It's like there's so many different flavors and cooking
Exactly.
techniques.
Yeah. Oh my God. There's so many. And when you start to travel and like you're off the beaten path and you discover all these regional cheeses that are made all over, not just Europe but here as well. Like there are, it's almost like at least once every few weeks someone says, "Hey, have you tried this cheese that's happening?" Like 4 lakes down on in the Finger Lakes, the small little cheese producer, and like, no, I haven't yet. There's just so many out there, so many different, if you, yeah, it's never ending. And like, think about Italy and all the regional cheeses there, and France and all the cheeses there. It's like you can spend a lifetime. Which, oh wait, I think I'm doing that, spending a lifetime discovering cheese and celebrating cheese. But I feel kind of the same with with cider as well. Maybe there's a number that's capped at the moment, but still, I feel like, it's just like wine. Every year's vintage is different. It depends on like that year's crop, and like it's that's what keeps these like live foods, alive and exciting for us. Um, yeah.
So let's do a little cheese club cider and cheese pairing. So pick a place.
Okay, let's do it.
What are we drinking?
Oh my God.
And what's the cheese?
That's a great question, Jimmy. I would have to say I'm going to eat. So, Live and Run Dairy here, which is an Interlaken, little 6-minute drive for me. I'm going to eat their Finger Lakes Gold, which is aged goat cheese. It is an original recipe by them, and I love it dearly. I love it so, so much. And the cider I'm going to drink it with. This is a great question. Oh my goodness. It's going to have to be, let's see. Oh my God. So Eve Cidery just put out a beautiful rosé. It actually has a little bit of grapes, like a skin contact grape in it, with from Damiani. And I just had this the other day, and I really like to drink this rosé with you, Jimmy, and have a little bite of the Finger Lakes Gold together. Yeah.
Lively run.
And
Wow.
that is a little taste of the Finger Lakes right there.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you want to promote Cheese Club and you make it down to New York City for October 7th Cider Feast, we could preview it.
I think it's going to happen.
But you also, I'd love it. I also feel like you're going to be so busy up in the Finger Lakes too. So I'm going to cross my fingers for you to come down.
Yeah, there's a really robust, it's a little bit early, but the events are rolling into, Cider Week events calendar. There's South Hill Cider is doing their Cider Fest, which is showcasing all the local cider makers. And, there's something happening in the Hudson Valley as well, the Big Sip, which is all celebrating ciders alongside other craft beverages. And yeah, I think it's gonna be a really robust cider week.
Oh wow! When and where is the Big Sip? Do you know? That sounds really cool.
The Big Sip is on the calendar, Jimmy. Let me. It is. I want to say the 7th and the 8th. It's 2 days. Yeah, October 7th and October 8th. Yeah. So I want to say people are gonna have to go to Cider Feast in Brooklyn on the 7th, and then go to the Big Sip on Sunday the 8th. I think that's what I'm going to be doing.
I like that. That sounds
right.
Really
but
good.
That's the way to
Listen,
do it.
It's so great talking to you. I know. And then the last thing is looking up events and things. I have a couple of friends with like beer bars or tasting rooms in the city. They don't know how to sign up for Cider Week. So if they're going to do an event, let's just say I have a small bar tasting room. If I have do I have to have a New York State cider involved? Can I just pour tastes of a cider and put it in as an event for Cider Week?
Ideally, it will be a New York State cider, Jimmy. Honestly, but we're here to celebrate cider, so. So you can go. Can go to the Cider Week website, and if you scroll down on the calendar of events on the bottom, submit your event. So there's a link you can submit. We want to celebrate, restaurants, bars, retail shops that pour New York cider, and if they want to create an event or offer the ciders or highlight their menu with ciders, the ciders that they pour, please submit an event and let's celebrate.
That's great. It's just there's so much to do, and it's one of my favorite weeks of the year. Wow, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me here on Heritage Radio Network, and I have a feeling we'll be back this fall with Scott Ramsey and talk more about New York cider. Big thanks to Scott as well, who joined us earlier on. Thanks to our engineer Armin Spengen, and I'm Jimmy Carboni. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.